My parents sold my inheritance to fund my brother's business. Now he's bankrupt. They're homeless and I own the house they once threw me out of. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I've always been the family's afterthought. My older brother Daniel was the shining star, the one who could crash Dad's car and still get called responsible. I could graduate with honors and barely get a nod. Growing up, I learned early that attention wasn't free in our house. It was currency reserved for Daniel. I used to sit at the dinner table, fork in hand, listening to my parents talk about his potential. Mom would say, "Your brother's destined for greatness." Dad would nod proudly, adding, "He'll take care of all of us one day. You'll understand." That line stuck to me like a bruise I couldn't rub out. Meanwhile, I worked after school to afford things Daniel got handed: a used bike, a secondhand phone, college books. When I'd mention my struggles, my mom would smile gently and say, "That's just how life works, sweetheart. Some people lead, others follow." I told myself it didn't hurt, but every word carved something deep inside me. As years passed, Daniel became the family's entire identity. Every achievement of his was an event, every failure a shared crisis. I was invisible unless they needed something: fixing the fence, handling bills when Dad forgot, driving Mom to appointments when Daniel was too busy. Still, I held on to a quiet kind of hope. They once promised me that when the time came, I'd inherit the family house. "Your piece of stability," Mom called it. I believed that meant they saw me, that maybe one day I'd matter, but deep down I knew something was off. You can't build love out of leftovers, and I was starting to feel like the scraps in a family that only fed its favorite child, and I had no idea how much that belief, that tiny flicker of hope, was about to destroy me. I still remember the day they told me the house would be mine. It was after dinner. Dad was in his recliner, swirling ice in his glass, while Mom washed dishes with that fake soft smile she used when she wanted something. "Daniel's got his business dreams," Dad said, not looking at me. "You've always been the steady one. When we're gone, the house will be yours. Fair, right?" Fair. That word sat heavy in my chest. It was the first time they'd ever used it in a sentence that included me. I spent months clinging to that promise like it was sacred. Every time they asked me to mow the lawn, patch the roof, fix the leaky pipes, I did it without complaint. I'd tell myself, "This is for your future. Your home." Sometimes I'd walk through the empty rooms and picture where I'd put things when it was finally mine. My own coffee mug in the kitchen, a desk by the window where I'd write. It sounds small, but for someone like me, it was everything. Daniel, of course, didn't care. He'd stop by only to brag about his new watch, his new car, or the latest investment idea he had. Mom would light up like a kid at Christmas every time he spoke. When I tried to join the conversation, she'd cut me off with, "You just don't understand how ambitious your brother is." I told myself that was fine. I didn't need their praise, just their word. And they'd given it to me, right? But in families like mine, promises weren't meant to be kept. They were just tools to keep you obedient. And soon, I'd learn how fast fair can turn into forgotten. It happened on a Sunday night, one of those mandatory family dinners that always felt more like a performance than a meal. Mom made roast beef, Dad was in a good mood, and Daniel walked in late, wearing a designer jacket like he was some kind of celebrity. I should have known something was coming the moment Mom's face lit up. Halfway through dinner, Daniel cleared his throat dramatically. "I've decided to quit my job," he said, pausing just long enough for Mom to gasp and Dad to lean forward. He grinned. "I'm starting my own company, a new kind of app. It's gonna change the game." My fork froze midair. The guy who couldn't even commit to finishing a Netflix show was talking about entrepreneurship. But before I could process it, Dad was clapping him on the back, saying, "That's my boy!" Finally taking charge. Mom looked at me and said, "See? That's the kind of ambition you never had." I tried to smile, tried to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat. I wanted to say something logical, like maybe Daniel should plan, save research, but I didn't. Because in this house, logic was an insult if it came from me. A week later, I came home to see a realtor's car parked in the driveway. Dad was inside, signing papers. Mom beamed at me, saying, "We're investing in Daniel's future. It's all for the family." My heart sank. "Wait, you're mortgaging the house?" Dad frowned like I'd insulted him. "Don't be dramatic. It's a small loan. Once Daniel's business takes off, we'll all be swimming in money." That night, I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the lights in Daniel's window. I thought about that promise on my inheritance, my future, and I realized something terrifying. In this family, love always had an interest rate, and mine had just come due. The next few months were a slow-motion car crash. Daniel's revolutionary app wasn't making waves. It wasn't even making sense. He posted vague motivational quotes on LinkedIn while my parents bragged about their genius son, the entrepreneur. Every time I visited, the tension in the house grew heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. One night, Mom called me into the kitchen. Her tone was sugar-coated, the same one she used when she wanted me to fix something broken. "Honey," she said, "your brother's business just needs a little more runway. You've been saving money, right? Maybe you can help just for a while." I froze. "You're asking me to give him my savings?" Dad chimed in from the living room. "Don't make it sound so cold. It's not for him, it's for the family. For our future," I wanted to laugh. My future had already been mortgaged without my consent. "I can't," I said firmly. "That money's all I have." "You told me the house was my inheritance. Wasn't that enough?" Mom's eyes narrowed. "You've always been so selfish. Your brother takes risks. You hide behind excuses." That word, selfish, hit harder than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I almost caved, but something inside me snapped instead. "I've spent my whole life cleaning up your messes. Maybe it's time Daniel learned what responsibility feels like." Mom's face turned cold. "You'll regret talking to us like that." I walked out, heart pounding, hands shaking. I'd never raised my voice to her before, never dared to. 2 days later, I found out they'd taken out another loan, this time using my name as a guarantor without asking. My credit was trashed, my trust shattered, and for the first time, I started to wonder if I was their son, or just their safety net. I came home one evening to find a moving truck parked in front of the house. At first, I thought maybe the neighbors were moving out, until I saw our family name on the boxes being loaded. I ran inside, my chest tightening. The living room was chaos, furniture stacked, walls bare, and strangers walking through like they owned the place. "Mom? What's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking. She barely looked up. "Oh, you're here. Good. Help the movers with those boxes." I blinked, confused. "Boxes? What are you talking about?" Dad walked in behind her, avoiding my eyes. "We sold the house," he said flatly. "It was the only way to pay off Daniel's debts. The business didn't work out." My stomach dropped. "You sold the house? The one you promised me?" Mom's expression twisted. "Don't start. It's just a house. Your brother was drowning. What kind of person lets family fail when they could help?" I felt heat rising in my face. "You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your tone. We did what we had to. You'll understand when you have a family of your own." That line, "you'll understand," was the final match in a lifetime of gasoline. I took a step forward, shaking. "No. What I understand is that I was never part of this family unless you needed someone to sacrifice." Mom's eyes hardened. "If that's how you feel, maybe it's best you go." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a sentence. An hour later, I stood on the sidewalk with a duffel bag, watching strangers pack my childhood into a truck. The porch light flickered behind me, the same light that once meant home. Now it was just a reminder. I'd been replaced, sold off, and erased in one afternoon, and for the first time I realized I didn't just lose a house. I lost whatever was left of my family. I crashed on my friend Adam's couch that night, one of those thin, lumpy ones where every spring feels like a question about your life choices. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to make sense of what happened. My parents hadn't just sold the house. They'd sold me out. Everything I'd built my quiet life around, the promise, the trust, the illusion that I mattered, was gone. The first week, I couldn't eat. Adam kept saying, "Man, you gotta move on." But how do you move on from being erased by the people who raised you? I'd wake up drenched in sweat, replaying their words, "It's just a house." "You'll understand someday. Maybe it's best you go." Each line felt like a knife twisting deeper. Work became my only distraction. I picked up extra shifts at the engineering firm just to stay out of my head. But even there, I caught myself zoning out, staring at blueprints while memories replayed like static. I'd think about Dad teaching Daniel how to drive while I mowed the lawn. about Mom hugging him after every failure while I got told to toughen up. Then one morning I saw the news. Daniel's business had officially filed for bankruptcy. The articles mentioned mismanaged funds and questionable investments. It was humiliatingly public. But when I called my parents, Mom answered and said, "Don't you dare call to gloat. Your brother's going through enough." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. That night I broke down. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. Sitting there in the dark, I realized I had nothing left. No family, no home, no savings, not even a sense of belonging. Just a couch and the dull hum of a broken air conditioner. And for the first time in my life, I understood what alone really meant. But that emptiness? It was the first step towards something I didn't see coming. My quiet revenge. I made myself a promise that night. No more chasing their approval, no more bleeding for people who only noticed me when I was useful. If I was going to rebuild, it would be for me and no one else. The next few years became a blur of work and quiet progress. I volunteered for extra projects at my firm, stayed late when others went home, and taught myself financial literacy through online courses. I cut out every distraction. No social media, no holidays, no emotional attachments. Just focus. Adam used to joke, "Oh, you're turning into a machine, man," but I didn't care. Machines don't feel heartbreak. Machines don't get betrayed. Machines just build. Eventually, it started paying off. I got promoted twice in 1 year, moved into a small apartment of my own, and bought a used car that didn't smell like despair. The first time I held the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Still, there were nights when I'd drive past my old neighborhood just to see that house. The paint had faded, the porch lights were dim, and the yard was overgrown. I'd sit there for a while, engine running, wondering if they ever thought of me, if they ever regretted choosing Daniel's dream over my life. But even as I asked myself those questions, something inside me shifted. I didn't want their apology anymore. I didn't want closure from people who never gave it willingly. What I wanted was success so loud they couldn't ignore it, even if they tried. So I doubled down. I invested in property, flipped small apartments, and reinvested every dollar. Slowly, I built what they never gave me: stability, independence, and quiet pride. I didn't know it yet, but the world was about to hand me an opportunity so ironic it almost felt scripted, a chance to rewrite my family's entire story. From the deed up, it happened on a random Tuesday morning, the kind that starts too quiet. My phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Hi, is this Mr. Collins?" a woman's voice asked. "I'm calling from Silverwood Realty. A foreclosed property just hit the market. The address is 214 Maple Drive. You listed it as an area of interest last year." My stomach dropped. 214 Maple Drive, my childhood home. I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. I just sat there staring at the floor, the world suddenly distant. "I'll take it," I finally said. My voice didn't sound like mine. She laughed softly. "Sir, don't you want to see it first?" "I've already seen it," I replied. My whole life. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers in silence. No hesitation, no second guessing. When I held the keys, my hands trembled, not from excitement, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. The house they sold out from under me now belonged to me again. The first time I walked back through that door, the air hit different. The floors creaked the same way they used to. The walls still had faint outlines where family photos once hung. In the corner of the living room, I found a small dent in the baseboard, the same spot where I crashed my toy truck when I was 6. It felt surreal, like I was walking through a museum built from old wounds. I spent hours just standing in silence, tracing my fingers along the banister, remembering the nights I'd sat there listening to Daniel get praised for things I'd done quietly behind the scenes. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just whispered, "Welcome home," like I was talking to the version of me that never got to stay. What I didn't realize then was that fate wasn't finished with me. It was about to bring them back, into my life in the most unexpected way possible. News about Daniel came to me the same way it always did, through whispers. A mutual acquaintance mentioned he'd gone bankrupt, that his investors had pulled out after creative accounting issues. I didn't care enough to dig deeper. For once, his chaos wasn't my responsibility. But then I heard about my parents. Their savings had gone. The retirement fund they'd poured into Daniel's dream burned to ashes. They'd sold their car, moved into a cheap rental outside the city, and were struggling to keep up with bills. I should have felt something. Pity, anger, satisfaction, but all I felt was an odd, detached calm, like watching a storm from behind bulletproof glass. One night, out of curiosity, I looked Daniel up. His social media had vanished. His LinkedIn bio now read, "Seeking new opportunities." The same brother who used to call me risk-averse was now jobless and drowning in debt. Meanwhile, my life had quietly flourished. The real estate investments were booming, and I'd finally opened my own development firm. Every decision, every long night, every wound had led me here, not to vengeance, but survival. Still, part of me wondered if karma was real. Because somehow, despite never wishing it on them, life had dealt them the exact pain they'd given me. Helplessness. A month later, I drove past their old rental by accident. The windows were boarded up. A for lease sign leaned crooked in the yard. I asked a neighbor and learned they'd been evicted. No savings, no help. No Daniel to rescue them. For years, I'd dreamed about what I'd say if I ever saw them again. The speeches, the fury, the final confrontation. But when it finally happened, it didn't come with thunder or revenge. It came quietly, a knock at my door. 3 silhouettes standing in the rain, and my mother's voice trembling through the storm. Please, we have nowhere else to go. When I opened the door, time froze. There they were, soaked, exhausted, and smaller than I remembered. My father, once proud and booming, stood silent behind my mother, who clutched her purse like it was the last thing she owned. Daniel stood off to the side, unshaven, his eyes hollow. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Please, Mom whispered, voice shaking. We didn't know where else to go. We just need a place to stay for a while. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were standing on the porch of the very house they sold to save him. I could feel the weight of the past pressing against my chest. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment I was told to understand someday. Dad finally spoke, his voice rough. We'll pay you back once things get better. We just need time. Time? I asked quietly. You sold this house for time once before. Remember how that turned out? Daniel's jaw tightened. Don't start with that, man. We're not here for pity. I looked at him, the golden child now dulled and broken. Good, because you won't get any. For a long silence, only the rain spoke. Part of me wanted to shut the door right then, to finally give them what they gave me. Nothing. But something stopped me. Maybe habit, maybe closure. I stepped aside. You can come in. But this isn't your home anymore. Not like it used to be. They entered quietly, eyes darting around as if stepping into a ghost of their own making. The air felt heavier with every breath, thick with memories that refused to die. That night, I lay awake in my old room, now my office, listening to the creak of footsteps down the hall. The house felt alive again, but not in the comforting way it used to. It felt like the past had moved back in, and it was sleeping under my roof. The next morning, I found them sitting at the kitchen table, the same spot where, years ago, they'd once decided my future without me. Mom was stirring sugar into her coffee, pretending not to look nervous. Dad avoided my eyes, and Daniel scrolled on his phone like a teenager hiding from reality. So, Mom began, her tone cautious. We were thinking, maybe we could stay here for a while. Just until we get back on our feet. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You mean my house, she blinked. What? This isn't your home anymore, I said evenly. I bought it. 2 years ago. From the bank. For a moment, no one spoke. Dad's eyes snapped up, face tightening. You had bought this house? I nodded. The same one you sold to pay off Daniel's debts. The same one you threw me out of? Yeah. That one. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Mom's spoon slipped into her cup, clinking against the porcelain. Daniel's expression flickered between disbelief and shame. Finally, Dad exhaled. I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son owned the roof over your head? I interrupted. Yeah, neither did I. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. I looked at her, at both of them, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not vengeance, just finality. Family doesn't sell your home and call it sacrifice. You taught me that, Daniel finally spoke, his voice small. You're really gonna let us stay here out of pity? I shook my head. Not pity, boundaries. You'll have one guest room. You follow my rules or you leave. No exceptions. Dad opened his mouth to protest but stopped. He saw it in my eyes, the quiet strength they'd spent a lifetime underestimating. For the first time ever, the power in that room belonged to me. And it was the calmest kind of revenge imaginable. Weeks turned into months, and the tension inside the house thickened like humidity before a storm. My parents barely spoke unless it was to ask permission. Permission to use the laundry, permission to host no one, permission to exist under the roof they once said I'd never belonged to. I didn't enjoy their discomfort, but I didn't erase it either. Some lessons had to linger. Daniel stayed only a few weeks before he cracked. One morning, he left without a word, taking his duffel bag and pride with him. I watched from the window as he climbed into a rusted car and drove away. Part of me pitied him, the golden child finally stripped of his shine, but mostly I felt free. My parents tried in their awkward way to make peace. Mom started cooking again, leaving small notes like dinner's in the fridge. Dad mowed the lawn without being asked. There were no apologies, just quiet actions that whispered what words never could. One night, as we sat in the living room, me working on my laptop, them watching the same old sitcom reruns, Mom broke the silence. You've done well for yourself, she said softly. Your father and I, we didn't make it easy. I didn't look up. No, you didn't, she nodded, accepting it. That was all I needed. Not forgiveness, not tears, just acknowledgement. When they finally decided to move into senior housing months later, I helped them pack. As I locked the door behind them, I stood in the same hallway where my father once yelled, "You're not part of this family anymore." Now his voice was gone, replaced by quiet, steady peace. Owning this house wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the part of myself they'd tried to sell off. The silence felt sacred now, not empty but earned. I took one last look at the empty living room and whispered, I finally understand, Dad. Family doesn't take care of you because you owe them. They do it because you matter, and for the first time in my life, I did.